Good morning, everyone. Welcome back for our 11 a.m. session. I'm the Chief Content Officer of the PDMI, Thomas Hare. We say welcome to every single one of you who've chosen to join us here at PDMieast. We are so thrilled to have all of you here. Our U.S. Hispanic Council has put together a tremendous session for you all today, and it's one of our 10 sessions over the next 2 days. All of these sessions will eventually be on our YouTube channel, so keep an eye out there. If you have to bail at any point during this, you can catch the rest of it on YouTube probably in the next couple weeks. If you are looking for information on any of our speakers, there's a sign right outside the session hall that has a couple of QR codes on it that you can grab all of our speaker bios and any updates to the sessions. Obviously, we have a print deadline. We had a couple of tweaks to those speakers over the last 10 days. So feel free to use those QR codes and grab that for your phone. We are very thankful to our education sponsor, Pacific Media Technologies, for their support. PMT has a brief video message to share with you.
We trust PMT because we know they're professionals. We've been working with PMT for over 20 years.
They're the most customer friendly, they're the most timely, the most accurate.
They are really wonderful with their technology and the advancements of their technologies that they implement.
They treat us like we're the only client that they have.
Whatever we need, we know it's going to get done. So that's really important to us, that personal connection.
Pacific Media Technologies. Technology driven, quality guaranteed.
So again, thank you to PMT for your support of the educational sessions. Once we get switched back over to the deck. PMT. Smaller but stickier, enhancing Hispanic customer loyalty. That is our topic today. We brought together a tremendous group directly here next to me, of course, Kyle Patten from Televisa Univision, Beth Johnson, Omni Direct, Federico Garza from Telemundo, and Nick Pietropinto, Double Diamond VIP, all helmed, of course, by Marcelino Miyares, who is the chair of the PDMI U.S. Hispanic Council and one of the co-founders of D2H Partners.
Morning, everyone. So the premise of today is that our market is smaller but stickier, ultimately leading to higher lifetime values. That's our premise, and we hope that we convince you of that this morning. On that path, we're asking ourselves a few key questions. From the top of the funnel to the bottom. So from a media perspective, where are Hispanics spending their screen time? From a marketing perspective, what role do language and culture play in the media mix? From a lifetime value perspective, what do just the simple demographics tell us in terms of where we are today generationally and where we will be within the next 5 to 10 years? It's coming faster than we all think. And then from an opportunity perspective, what product categories are sort of at an existential crossroads? Which categories risk extinction if they don't get with the program? So that being said, I'm going to start with the top of the funnel. And I'll be, for each speaker, I'll make a small statement, and then I'll let them respond top of mind, their perspectives. And of course, at the end, you can ask questions, and also if you guys want to add to anybody's statements, feel free. Except for Nicolas. No, just kidding. So let's start at the top of the funnel. I don't want to overwhelm you with numbers. This is just sort of meant to be a placeholder, but I've never seen the Hispanic TV viewing statistics labeled this way, which is 254.1 billion minutes of viewing time. That's a number that's kind of hard to wrap yourselves around. It's kind of like the 2 to 3 trillion buying power that we have. You know, what does that really mean in the big scheme of things? I think what's important here is if you go to the middle, there's a Hispanic column. What this indicates is Hispanics are slower cutting the cord, not in the physical sense of cutting the cord, but in the sense of they still spend a lot of time watching live TV, watching broadcast TV. And there's going to be a bit of a paradox because at the same time, they watch more streaming than the general market. So where generally just watching a lot more TV, watching a lot more video content, regardless of where it's getting delivered. But the streaming number is super interesting because it's a significantly higher index in terms of the time that we spend watching streaming TV. And then related to that, we also index high for social media in general, social media platforms. A lot of that is social communication, but much of it is also video content that's being delivered by people like us, by advertisers. So, Kyle, the question to you is where are Hispanics watching in Televisa, Univision's perspective, and how is streaming playing into that?
Well, streaming, especially, not to shamelessly plug Univision, but I will, especially for us, we've seen a huge uptick in our streaming platform. But just to kind of start, from a social media perspective, Marce, you mentioned, 97% of Hispanics are on social media. And compared to non-Hispanic, they're 27% more. They're social networking, and they're also social shopping, I like to say. And 82% of Hispanics spend time on their mobile device versus, I think, close to 70% of non-Hispanic. 70% of them are using it for entertainment, just going on their phone. But the biggest shift we've seen especially is for shopping, with the intent to either purchase a product, either look up information on the product, buy the product, or look for possible coupons on the product. But going back to especially to streaming, 88% of Hispanics are streamers, and 90% of them have a connected device, and that's versus 75% of non-Hispanic, which is a huge number because, truthfully, Hispanics right now, they're very tech savvy, and they're earning for kind of that content for them that's relevant to them. And I think close to 66% of Hispanics actually prefer AVOD service versus actually a subscription service. And they like the ads because they're actually relevant to them. And from a Univision perspective, our VIX platform that's where we've seen the most growth by far. And I like to say that's kind of where some of our audience is going, but that's our lifeboat, compared to our huge linear networks that we have. But, we've seen such an expansion with Hispanic consumers growing to our platforms. Not only on social, but also our VIX, also our linear, soccer, our local, our advanced advertising. We've seen such growth, especially with Hispanics going toward this, and I think it's only going to be getting bigger.
I think it makes sense that Hispanics are seeing themselves more in streaming content because by definition it's more targeted, right? So advertisers are calling out that audience and they're running ads that are going to be relevant to that audience. So that makes a lot of sense.
If I may add a point, and I'm not going to talk about against Univision, I promise. It's actually about how
you can be shameless for
Telemundo.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to do that. High road. No, I think that how we as Spanish language TV companies were embracing this change in behavior, right? So at Telemundo, we had recently the World Cup. Right, and we not only had it on the linear network, we also had it on Peacock, our NBCU platform. And we were the Spanish language network for the World Cup. Fox was the English language network. And as you can imagine, Fox had a much larger addressable audience, right? Because everybody basically who doesn't speak Spanish in this country. If you look at the most streamed games of the tournament, the top 19 of the top, 19 of the top 20, the top 19 were on Peacock, not on Fox, right? So a much smaller audience. However, they embrace the opportunity to watch it on streaming. I think that's, again, I don't want to speak bad against Fox. I think they missed an opportunity to make the games more widely available, and because we did, we saw the success. So I think, again, as we recognize the change in behavior, we need to take advantage of it.
Smaller but stickier.
Absolutely.
So now is going to come your section, Federico. I love this slide. It originated with Telemundo sometime in the past. And I love it because it kind of indicates that language and viewership is not a zero-sum game, right? Latinos have, even first generation, second generation, have a foot in both cultures. And we can embrace content from both cultures, video, audio, digital, whatever it is. And that makes a huge difference for marketers who are recognizing this, whether they're investing more in Spanish, whether they're making sure that they're investing enough in Spanish. It makes a huge difference on return on advertising spend. Those that have higher investments in the Hispanic market relative to their overall budget are going to see a lift. And if your messaging is fluent, meaning more relevant, more comprehensive to the viewer, you're going to see an even higher lift. So Federico, who's Director of Research at Telemundo, probably has a lot to say on this subject.
Thank you, Marce. I mean, this is a deeply personal topic for me, right? As a Hispanic person, I'm part of this group we're talking about. So I think that if you're a brand, if you're a marketer, you're an advertiser that wants to connect with Hispanics, you need to start by understanding Hispanics, right? Understanding our culture, understanding our language. And if we go back to the previous slide, as Marcy was talking about, we are at the intersection of two worlds, right? We, on the one hand, we're deeply proud of our heritage and we embrace our roots. We want to stay connected to our countries of origin or countries of heritage. At the same time, we embrace this country, this new culture for many of us. We want to learn more about it. We want our children to, grow up here and be part of this culture. And that's why we coined this term of 200%er. Now, it hasn't always been this way, right? There's an old movie, a Mexican comedy called Ni de aquí, ni de allá. Not from here, not from there. And it's about this Mexican immigrant who comes to the States and very soon finds herself like a fish out of water. She doesn't feel like she belongs here because she doesn't speak the language. Actually, her diet is basically coffee and donuts because that's the only thing she can say. And she doesn't belong in Mexico anymore because she left, right? And so she felt like she was from nowhere. I think nowadays, in the last few years, the last few decades, it's become okay to be Hispanic. It's become okay to speak Spanish. And I think that now Hispanics, we're trying to preserve this culture. Now, again, this is deeply personal, so I'm sorry I'm going to keep going a little bit longer. This is a journey, right? I call it the bicultural journey. And we're not all Hispanics are in the same place in this journey. But regardless, there's some values, there's some elements to our identity that are critical. And I invite you again to understand it. The first one is family. Right? Family is at the core of Hispanics. And family doesn't just mean to have a lot of kids or multi-generational household, although we're more likely to have one. But family is about something more transcendental. It's about creating wealth that transcends generations. It's about prosperity that can go from one generation to the next. It's what drives significant decisions in people's lives. That's why many people leave their countries and come to this country so they can aspire to a better life for their kids and their grandkids. That's why second, third generations try to continue building on that, and they're the first ones to go to college in the family or the first ones to own a business, right? So it's at the center of, again, the big decisions that we make. The second one is language, as Marcia was saying, right? So even when more than half of Hispanics are bilingual now, almost 90%, according to Nielsen at least, almost 90% of Hispanics still speak Spanish at home, right? I'm an example of that. My wife and I came to the U.S. as young adults, recently married. Our 3 kids were born here. I think by now we're all kind of like bilingual. Our kids definitely, we kind of. But what do we speak at home? Spanish. We win. We trump the kids, we speak Spanish. So that's part of our identity as a family, is we speak Spanish. Spanish is one of the key elements that people also want to protect as a currency to define identity and culture, right? Almost 90% of people want to keep Spanish now, and they want their kids to continue speaking Spanish. It's almost like a superpower for many Hispanics. And the third element is the culture in general. Now, just as family drives the big decisions in life, culture influences the little things that we do every day. From the food we eat, the music we listen to, the shows we watch, the language of the content that, in which we watch, the friends we have, the places we live, all those are heavily influenced by our culture. Again, it wasn't always okay to be this way. I have friends now in their 60s and 70s who were born or came to the country as kids in parts of the country like Texas or California, and they were punished for speaking Spanish, in school. Their parents pushed them from, to speak English and not Spanish. And so now they regret the fact that they grew up without that culture and not even being able to speak Spanish in some cases. Now it is much, much important. So why family, language, and culture are important? Because if you're a marketer, if you're a brand, you need to understand that Hispanics now expect you to recognize the importance of that culture. They expect you to talk to them in their language. They expect you to have a culturally relevant message. And if you do, now going to this slide, right? If you're able to connect with Hispanics this way, there's going to be a huge payoff, right? This is where, we at NBC in Telemundo, we track thousands of campaigns, and we've seen that when the consumer perceives that the message reflects their culture, they're 2 times more likely to know more about the company or the brand or the product. They're almost 3 times more likely to buy a product, and almost 3 times more likely to recommend the product to someone else. If companies, if advertisers invest in Spanish language TV and they do it in a active and in a significant way, the return on their advertising spend multiplies, right? You can see on the left, and the left is if you have a higher investment versus a lower investment, on average you can get a 70% higher return on your investment, almost $4.50 for every dollar that you invest. And then on the right talks about how engaged you are with your message. Like if you care about the message, because there's a difference between, hey, I'm just gonna translate whatever ad I have on mainstream TV and I'm just gonna put it in Spanish, versus you're actually going to have a message that is directly targeting Hispanics and adapted to the culture and the language. You're gonna have a higher return too, right? So anything between 40 to 70% higher return if you can, again, value, understand, and connect with Hispanics through the culture and language.
Yeah, and the column on the right actually demonstrates the power of using Spanish. There's a lot of sort of total market planning going on and assumptions about reaching Latinos in English, which is very much possible. But when you make the actual investment in Spanish, you're going to see a significant return. And in Spanish language television, Spanish language streaming, et cetera. There's kind of a myth about language. As the population has grown over time, right? And we're close to 65 million now. Yep. We'll be 100 million in 15 years. Fewer people as a percentage will be defining Spanish as their dominant or preferred language. That's true, because the Hispanic market is growing in large part with children in the United States. However, the myth of language in marketing is that in absolute numbers, more people will be speaking Spanish. So the market is not, from a Spanish language perspective, the market is not getting smaller. It may be getting smaller as a percentage of the pie, but the market, the Spanish language dependent, preferring, dominant, the ones that look for themselves on TV, the ones that watch Spanish language TV, that market itself is growing. And we're seeing it, we see it manifest just in the 2 networks that are here, and many others, cable and otherwise, but Telemundo and Univision are expanding their platforms, and they almost can't keep up with the demand, or at least as a media agency, they're always telling us they're sold out. I don't know, but there's some level of not being able to keep up with the demand that Spanish language speakers, beyond Spanish interest, Spanish language speakers have for Spanish language content.
Hey, Mars, I just want to say one really super quick thing I just was thinking as he was speaking is also you have, entertainment like Bad Bunny, and you have Disney movies, and you kind of have like English kind of even tapping into Spanish like kind of entertainment as well. That's kind of all helping it all kind of come together too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, nobody knows this, or a few people. Selena Gomez has more followers than Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
Hispanics are creeping into the mainstream culture. They have for a long time, but now it's being sensed and tracked more deliberately because now everything is more trackable. So it's not anecdotal anymore. It's a very real thing. So now we're going to talk a little bit about lifetime value. This slide is meant just to show that multicultural households under the age of 18 are on the rise. And underscoring this, if we looked at just I don't know if it would be the Gen Z or the Alpha generation, or look at high schoolers, we represent already 30% of all high school students, public and private, right? So the more years that go by, the more Hispanics are going to represent a larger share of the pie. And in fact, somewhere in the next 5 to 10 years, multicultural minorities will be the majority in this country. And Hispanics are the largest segment of that and a driving force of that. And it all points to a very simple demographic indicator, which Beth is going to talk about. Hispanics are younger. I'll let you do the talking.
Sure. You're doing a great job, though. Really pertinent to what Kyle and Federico have already said is that Hispanics have a much younger median age than non-Hispanics. So Hispanics are on average 30 years old, non-Hispanics are 38. So you already have another 8-year window there that you can really expand and sell your product or your service to Hispanics, and that goes a long way. They're gonna be living longer, and also the demographics point to, as Marce already said, that right now in 2023, in the Gen Z and even the Gen X, non-Hispanics are under 50% of the population, and multicultural takes up the other, roughly 60%. So depending on what your demographic target is, it only makes sense that you would invest in Spanish because that's where the population growth is going. And that's where your demographic, no matter really what your demographic target is, we have some products that are older skewing. That portion of the Hispanic audience is probably only about 10% now, but if you look at the age buckets, that are now in Gen X, Gen Z, even millennials, okay, eventually, in 30 or 40 years, that's gonna be the majority of your market. Even if I know young is also appealing for targeting Hispanics. You really have to target Hispanics if you have a younger skewing product, but don't forget about it, to build that lifetime value for your brand. If you even have an older skewing product, you need to be in the game. So if you engage them early and they're very brand loyal, U.S. Hispanics, it's high word of mouth. If they're seeing your ads in English, it may not be resonating as much as Spanish, so we get a lot of that from clients that, well, we're getting those on the English side anyway, but they may not be as brand loyal to you if they're consuming that in English. So that goes back to the language. And you can't be in and out of the market. I mean, you can be, but you're not gonna be very successful with your brand and extending that lifetime value. If you really are in the market consistently, it may take some time for you to see your return on investment, but the payoff in the end is so much worth the wait because you're going to have a lifetime of that customer, and you're gonna have them, they are often in multi-generational households. So you might have someone more bilingual, to Federico's point, his children, that are convincing their parent or their grandparent to call or text or go online and buy your service. So it's very important to stay consistent throughout and always invest in it. And like I said, you might not see the payoff right away, but but in the end, that's where the population is going. So you need to be in the market and get that brand loyalty early on, and it'll last you a lifetime, hopefully.
Okay, and that's particularly true, I think, for anything, any service that is subscription oriented. From telecom to cable to financial services to health to anything that's long-term, that lifetime value sort of accelerator is going to be even more and more
And I think
pronounced.
a great example is like Allstate and State Farm. They've invested heavily. I'm not picking out insurance just because we dabble a lot in insurance, but they've been in the Hispanic market and investing heavily for years before we even knew that Hispanics would be, and multicultural would be a majority minority. So, and it's paying off for them. Sure, you have Progressive, Geico, you have other options now, but because they were in the market early and really invested a lot in making their presence known, making them a household name, Hispanics are sticking with them.
Okay, so we open with media, theoretical top of the funnel, then forcing people down with using Spanish language as a fluent currency of communication. Now Nicolas is going to talk a little bit about the bottom of the funnel. What does this mean in the short term in terms of how Spanish language KPIs pair up with or challenge English language KPIs?
So I put together an example here, but before getting to the example, there's a lot of KPIs out there that we want to focus on a direct-to-consumer campaign. One of the top KPIs that we use is the ROAS, right? Return on ad spend. And that ROAS, basically, they call it the ultimate source of truth sometimes on these campaigns, right? So it's basically all the revenue that you generated across your channels divided by the media spend, right? But ultimately, yes, you look at that as the ultimate source of truth, but you need to manage your campaign with more granular KPIs, and there's a bunch of them. There's a lot of them, right? So in reality, you need to focus on your media and which media are you going to do and which KPI, it's going to tell you that truth. So when you have a marketing plan, a media plan, you start by saying, okay, which channel am I going to be talking about? So let's just say you talk about TV, right? So on TV, specifically, you can talk TV, radio, social media, print, etc. for these KPIs. We select TV, and within TV, we have a variety of different lengths or formats, as they are called, right? So you have the long format. The long form is 28.5 minutes for the ones that they know. Probably everybody knows, but anyway. It's also called, the long form as we define it. Mid-form or full break is 5 minutes long. Then you have all the short formats, 3 minute, 2 minute, 1 minute, 30 seconds, 15 seconds. So depending on the length you have, how much time do you have to put your ad on TV is the call to actions, the opportunities you have to show your product and to close the sale, right? To generate an action point. So if we define the best chance, right, the 28.5 minutes of time that we put on TV, right, long form, so we're going to define that, and now we have to define our call to actions. So we could put a URL, a website, we can put a phone number, right? Text message, text this code to XYZ, or these days very relevant QR codes as well, right? So I selected TV, I selected long form. Now let's choose 2 or 3 of these call to actions. So I'm going to put a URL, a website, and a call 800 number, if you wish. So now we can discuss, okay, which KPIs are we going to use to measure that specific selection, right? So for a call center, of course, let's just say we spend $10,000 as an example. We're going to be measuring how much revenue we generated with these $10,000, how many calls, right, hit our switch, as we say, right? How many orders were generated with these calls, then the cost per order, the cost per call, the conversion, which is, of course, the order divided by the calls, average order value, and this is gross total revenue potential on that sale, right? Then we have lifetime value later on.
Right.
And last but not least, the MER, the media efficiency ratio, is similar than the ROAS, but at that granular level, only at that channel, at that TV, at that long form, etc. So those 9, 10 KPIs, we use them on a daily, weekly basis. We look them very closely and we adjust them. Even the conversion at the call center, right? It's really an average of potentially your 3, 4x many call centers, because if you have peaks of calls, one call center might not have the capability to manage all your calls. So if you, like I like to say, if you double click on that conversion, you open 4 different conversions and you have a flow there. How you set up these rules to send the calls to the different places. So that's a KPI on its own. How you manage your 4 call centers, right? Do you use a routing platform? Do you send them sequentially, percentage-wise, etc.? So that's a KPI on its own. Now going to the web, so remember, we put 28 minutes and a half on TV with multiple places where we put our URL in an 800 number, X many times, right? We're going to generate a direct response from that, right? So on the call center, we discussed the KPIs. On the web, they are similar but not the same. Of course, I spend $10,000 and then I'm going to generate X many visits. And from the visits, a cost per visit. From the orders, a cost per order on the web. Same MER, similar, right? And same web AOV. So these are all the KPIs that we typically take, about 10 on each side. And then, last but not least, a web to call center order ratio. So if I spend this $10,000, X many visits, X many calls, orders on both sides, how do we compare these orders in both, right? Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40, 30-70? Depending on the product, your vertical, and many other things out there, then you're going to end up, in the past used to be smaller percentage of web orders. Oh, yeah, web orders, and these days it passed to 50 plus on your web percentage, at least in a D2C campaign, right? So I put this again back to my example, because we're here today to discuss English versus Spanish. So now this example, if we invest that $10,000, I'm going to start on the left side, 10,000 invested, right? The total revenue spend, it's 25,000. This is an example, but it's a good average example, educated guess, I would say. You generated 100 calls, 1,000 visits, 85 total orders. 60% was the percentage of web orders in this example, and 2.5 plus MER on that English side. If you look at the Spanish side, right? Spanish generates a lot more calls, right? The CPC is much lower, sometimes half the cost, right? 30 to 50%, sometimes even more than that. So on the savings on the call, but then the web percentage is lower. So it balances out. That's a very conservative improvement, by the way. I'd always take like a 10% improvement overall, and this is front end only, acquisition only. I'm not talking about LTV. LTV is Stickier, and we're talking about this today, right? But we have a percentage of people that, 2 things that I want to highlight before wrapping this up, right? A percentage of people that wouldn't, Beth, you were saying this, wouldn't buy your product if you're not connected on a Spanish language. So you are leaving money on the table. Beyond being better, or an edge of being X% better, it's like you're not connecting with them, period. And that percentage of people is growing, right? So that's an important component. And then on the Stickier side, of course, you're going to get more front end and back end, so it's going to compile for your campaign.
So numbers are always a little dizzying. If you get this presentation later and you start to break this down from sort of a path to purchase perspective, you're going to see essentially that depending on your product or category, the Hispanic market is capable of outperforming the English, right? So the last 10% of your budget that you spend on Spanish is going to outperform your English in general. But the path to purchase will be different. We're more efficient on the call center side. We're a little less efficient on the website, but overall, we're at parity or slightly better, right? Of course, it depends on everybody's product or service.
Hey, Mars, we've seen some success having a Spanish spot actually drive to an English website. Seen a lot of success. And so I think that's something that's going to definitely kind of keep growing.
In fact, in the last session that Beth and I did in San Diego, we've seen with some of our clients that for every visit to Spanish, there's at least 3 to 4 to English, all the way through signups, all the way through purchasing. Hispanics still have a sort of a love-hate relationship with Spanish sites. They're not all, unfortunately, they're not all transcreated very well. They're not all planned very well. And the moment there's any sort of cognitive dissonance in a website, they immediately go to the English or they pick up the phone.
They feel English is more authentic almost.
Yeah, more trustworthy.
Yes, trustworthy.
Yeah. And if it's a bad Spanish site, more authentic, right?
And when they search, they're likely going to land at the English website.
Yeah, when
anyway,
they do a search, they're going to end up where the paid search money is, which is usually in English. So this brings us sort of to the last slide. Is what's the opportunity cost for companies and marketers that don't begin to address the Hispanic market? And we sort of asked ourselves the question, which categories are at risk? And I think you look at a slide like this, and I don't know how legible those diagonal categories are, but virtually every category is at risk, right? Hispanics index high for almost everything. Those orange numbers that you see, the orange bar, is the intent to purchase index above the baseline English. And it's every category, including home ownership. The ones that are surprisingly low are Amazon Prime, because Hispanics over-index shopping on Amazon, but maybe they're not Prime subscribers. There's a couple ones here that you wonder a little bit about, but all of the major categories that you would expect, from high-end expenses, automotive, household buying, to appliances and smartphones and devices, everything is being driven in large part by the Hispanic market, with underinvestment. So imagine if you began to amplify your message in Spanish, what it would do to these numbers. So I'd like to get randomly your guys' take on categories that are particularly at risk if they don't begin to address this market in Spanish.
Can I, before jumping into specific categories, just maybe give people a little bit of a framework on how to think about potential categories? Because I think it, again, goes back to who we are in our specific situation, right? So I think there's three things that can help us identify good potential categories to resonate with Hispanics. One, again, this the fact that we're these 200%ers, right? Because we buy salsa and we buy ketchup. We buy tortillas and we buy bread, right? It's not either or. So everything that has, categories like consumer goods and, everything that can give us what, our ancestors or, back at home we used to eat, plus everything that now we eat here because we love everything in this country too. That's one type of category that can resonate with Hispanics, right? Another one is when you learn about the challenges that we have by coming to a country and starting from scratch. So you can very quickly see things like financial services where there's a gap, right? Because maybe we didn't use them before, we don't trust the companies here, but we're very concerned about it, right? Like, Hispanics are more concerned about retirement than non-Hispanics, and yet they are at a much lower level in terms of retirement planning. So there's a lack of education there. So again, categories where can educate Hispanics and address their concerns. So that's the second one. And I think the third one is to Beth's section, that have to do with the demographics, right? We're younger, so we're more likely to be raising kids. And so what do we need to buy? We need to buy cars, we need to buy houses, we need to buy the furniture that go inside the houses. So everything that is going to appeal to people who are starting to build a nest egg and starting to accumulate wealth. So again, those three ways to think about potential categories that are going to be very attractive with Hispanics.
I don't think there's really any true categories that's missing out. I think all the categories have grown the last few years, and if anything, you could say that Hispanics are kind of keeping the economy running given the financial situation that we're in, considering they're over-indexing in almost all categories, like we've kind of mentioned today. So, I think it's just more you're going to see, certain categories maybe spike in certain quarters or in certain years. That's the only thing I can think of. But I think we've seen, at least in Univision, I'm sure Telemundo, you've seen a huge spike in the DTC brand spending because they like the fluidity of cancelability of direct response or performance marketing, and they're chasing performance. That's what they're doing. And so they're able to cancel, and they're seeing what's working, why it's working, and that's where they're going to allocate their dollars. So I could just see more. I just see more growth. I don't see anyone that's necessarily missing. I don't think there's all like, oh, here's a $200 million category we weren't hitting on. I don't think it's that. I think everything's going to steadily grow. But with the financial situation that we're in, I'm very curious, how the growth will be over the next few years.
Yeah, I think it's, virtually every category has a first mover on Spanish language TV. What we're not seeing really is the depth, right? And we see it in the percentages of budgets. I mean, we're almost 21% of the consumer market, and we're getting 8, 9, 10% of marketing dollars, all disciplines combined. So TV even less. So I think that's where I think there's a disconnect, and we're just not doing enough in Spanish. Yeah. to get some depth at a category level. Yeah,
if you're going to really I think financial was probably one of the other categories. Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo. I think that is the growth category, at least that we've kind of discussed, at least at Univision. That's where is a possible. That's kind of lower as far as versus a telco versus a pharma versus a studio money spending perspective. So.
It might not be just missing categories. It might just be missing brands in those categories. It's just concentrated with 2 or 3 main brands that are advertising in that category, but there's several other brands that could be playing in the category and really speaking to this, U.S. Hispanic market that aren't. Right. So I don't know. I would agree. I would chime in on financial services, insurance, any kind of retirement planning. Those are all underserved, but I think even within the categories, yes, all the categories are covered, to Kyle's point, but there might be certain brands that should be in that category advertising in Spanish language that aren't.
Yeah. Financial services, by the way, you'll excuse my analogy, but it's a little bit like sex ed. We don't get enough of, because as Hispanics, in many cases, our parents coming or even ourselves coming from other countries, we didn't need to plan for the future, because you either had a pension or you expected your kids to sustain you in later days or something. But that was not something that you grew up learning about. Yeah. And so now you come to this country and it's like, how do I do this? I'm concerned, but I don't know how to. So I think, again, going back to the brands, so those brands that can find a way to close that knowledge gap and can tell you, hey, these are the 2 or 3 steps that you need to follow. I think those are the brands that are going to basically leapfrog over their competitors, at least with Hispanics.
To add to that, or to wrap it up, basically, I fully agree. It's across the board. I want to add beauty category out there, right? And exercise equipment, do it yourself at home. So these are already a little hotter, if you wish. It's not an opportunity missed because we are seeing them, right, out there and bubbling a little bit. And some campaigns start with the Spanish, by the way, these days, and then build from there because it's more efficient. So the typical discipline is English and then Spanish, but then I've seen the other way around as well.
The efficiency thing is very important because, again, it's not like brands and and marketers cannot reach Hispanics through English language TV. Right, but one is more difficult to do it at a high efficiency, more cost effective, and it also the cultural part gets more diluted, right? And so I think that's another reason why your numbers show that investing in Spanish language TV is more effective, because it's that you're talking to the audience you want, and also that it's more likely that you're going to get the message right.
We, as I mentioned last session, we use the mic because these videos will go on to YouTube, and we'll make sure we hear all the questions. So we have time for some questions from the audience. If anyone has one, please raise your hand. We'd love to hear from you.
Great panel. I'm a second generation Hispanic. My parents are from Dominican Republic. I've been in media for 20 years now, and it seems like every single year is the same conversation. Hispanic consumers are amazing. They spend a lot of money. We have the data to support it. Here we are today, continuing to say the same things in different ways. Why do you feel that brands don't invest more in this audience? And what do you think needs to happen in order for that to change?
Sure.
I'm going to go on a rant, so why don't you take it?
I think in the performance marketing world, for sure, there's not enough patience to see your efforts play out. So there's not enough willingness to have a lot more frequency of ads running wherever you're running, digital, streaming, linear. And it's like, if it doesn't happen right away, that ROAS, and you don't see it in the first couple weeks, then it's like, oh, get out of the market. Then they'll leave, then they'll come back to the market in 6 months or something when no one's seen your ad and expect it to work. So I think it's a lack of patience, maybe, and not that immediate results that they're getting that, says, oh, well, that doesn't work. We're just not going to invest. I can't speak to the brand side as much because performance marketing is our forte, but that's what we see, is that just not enough. It will take you longer with the Hispanic market, likely, than the non-Hispanic, but the lifetime value, the responsiveness, once they see your message, they talk about it with friends and family, they see your message several times, will be worth the long haul. But I just think that there's an impatience on the behalf of clients that they want that immediate response, immediate success, and not willing to wait for it. And I think you do have to wait for it in the Hispanic market.
Last year we were in San Diego, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
We were talking about one of the challenges, the measuring tools that we have today to see the results are limited and in some cases flawed, right? It's hard to measure Hispanics because everything from audience measurement with Nielsen to the attribution tools and everything, they don't necessarily know how to measure Hispanics and their behaviors. That's one of the challenges, I think, why you're not seeing results.
Yeah, no, that's
right?
a hot topic too. And you could see the ad in Spanish, and then you could see the same brand's ad in English, and you could go to the English website and you could have a sale or go to Amazon and do the sale, and how are you going to track that person?
That's
like
actually,
we produce that, but how are you going to, that's the big dilemma. And I think once you get that, or at least can say, hey, from X amount of airings from Spanish television or streaming or wherever, we generated this amount of lift on the English. But then you still have to get, clients to buy into that.
They just don't believe it.
They don't believe it.
They don't believe it. Like,
they don't believe it.
Everyone's doing partnerships with Video Amp, Samba, and everyone, we have all this data, and some of the agencies are like, all right, it's great, but we're going to go what we trust and what we know, and that sometimes it's just English language. So that's the unfortunate thing.
When we analyze a little deeper the attribution, which is a key component of this answer, by the way, it's a multi-touch attribution at the end of the day, right? So they will see us X many times on TV, English TV, Spanish, our social media, our website, XYZ, all our presence out there. They shop around for these touches, right? It used to be 7 times. I heard 11 times that moved along the way, right? So attribution is a key component there. And sometimes it's not as easy because the company doesn't have the tools. It's maybe too young of a brand. It's not disciplined enough. It doesn't have the analytics, doesn't go through the path. And sometimes it's not as easy to get to the bottom of, okay, is this a customer that came influenced by the Spanish or not? Or it came and converted in our website in English, and then it's really saw it 5 times in Spanish, and then just Google our brand and convert it over there. So attribution is on the center part of that, but I'm going to wrap it up saying I've managed these D2C campaigns, and my consultancy company does this, right? So we take these clients, and I see that there's an evolution on percentage of media spent on Spanish versus English. So over the years, I've seen this number increasing. Now, is it there where it should be? No. We have proved that it needs to continue to evolve there, right? But it was a single digit. Today, it's a 10 plus, and then it should be much higher than that. Population, Hispanic was, 30%, Marce? Right?
Yeah.
So depending on the demographic, depending on what's percentage on your company demographic, what that target should be, but it should be higher.
So to answer your question, I think what might be different is we have more tools for attribution that may provide evidence, but to Kyle's point, most marketers have their heads buried in the sand. And the better we do, the better they perform in their model, so there's a lot of confirmation bias going on. So, ultimately we hope attribution. Ultimately, if I can say, I know that sale happened in English, but I drove it in Spanish, the more clients begin to wake up. And I think there's also an element of bandwidth. A lot of clients don't have the bandwidth, or they're afraid of working in a different culture. The more we say you need to work in Spanish and be in culture, the more it's like, well, you're making it a little harder for me. So it's complex, but I think the big change will come with attribution.
You can't even say ratings erosion, because English language ratings have actually eroded more than even Spanish language. You can't even say it's a ratings issue. So.
Yeah, I read a synopsis every day, and the top Telemundo novela and the top Univision novela are at par with all of primetime programming in the general market.
Sunday night, there were more people in LA watching Casa de los Famosos and the wedding of Juan Rivera than people were watching March Madness.
Yeah.
So
the numbers are there. We just got to get people to believe them.
And the population and the demographic evidence is there. So it's just getting the buy-in.
Anyone else? You guys nailed it. That was pretty mild as far as rants go from you, I'll have to say. I've seen stronger.
Anybody wants to stay, they'll get the full story.
Well, thank you. Let's have a round of applause for our great group.